Good morning, everyone. Welcome to room A2, where our session is called Water Security Through Nature-Based Solutions, Theory to Practice. I hope you're all in the right room. I'm going to give a little pause in case anyone needs to get up and go. I was told to do this. This is not... Oh. All right. My name is Dimple Roy. I'm the Director of Water Management at the International Institute for Sustainable Development, where I have the privilege of leading a team of experts working on policy and practice for water outcomes across the world. This work also includes our work on scaling natural infrastructure on the Canadian Prairies, and you'll hear a little bit about that, as well as some of our work in Sub-Saharan Africa, and you'll hear colleagues talk about that as well. For those of you who don't know, IISD is an award-winning think tank working to accelerate solutions for a stable climate, sustainable resource management, and fair economies. IISD promotes the use of natural infrastructure or nature-based solutions in efforts in Canada and globally to meet water needs, build resilience to climate change, improve biodiversity, and a host of other benefits. And today's session is an extension of these efforts. Here, we're going to do something a bit different. We're focused on implementation. We're delighted to bring together experts who are intimately involved in similar efforts around the world in exploring the human dimensions of implementing nature-based solutions. With many efforts around the world, we're trying to figure out what it takes to take nature-based solutions from theory to practice. We're also pleased to welcome both on-site and online audiences. My colleague Megan Stromberg is managing some of our online participants. We'll have a few activities that involve our online participants. For those of you in the room, please do log on to Wi-Fi if you're able. We have a couple of Mentimeter polls if we can get them to work. So it'll be really useful if you can weigh in with your inputs as well. So recognizing that it's a Monday morning, we thought we'd start us off with a poll and a bit of an activity. This is where we have the first Mentimeter poll. We want you to tell us what your favorite type of nature-based solution is. All answers are welcome. And if you're in the room, you can take this time to turn to the person next to you, introduce yourselves if you haven't met them already, optional. And if you think you want to do this as a pair or talk about this a little bit, it's just an opportunity to get to know someone new today. I'll give folks a couple of minutes. I see the responses coming. Wetlands, reed beds, forestation, wetlands standing out. Rainwater harvesting. It's wonderful to see how these responses change in different parts of the world as well. All right, final 30 seconds or so. If any of you are just joining us, please take a minute to take the poll that's on the screen. If you can't access through the QR code, you can just join using menti.com, and the number is 82612291, if that helps. Thanks, folks. Okay, maybe I will start our formal session. So as I said, we're doing something a bit different here today. Instead of having panels speak to slides and talk about their own initiatives, we're going to be doing something that's more intimate and more of a conversation. But before we get into that, I'll introduce our experts sitting on the podium. It's a bit of a tight-knit group there. On the other side, we have José Methot on your extreme left. José is Senior Policy Specialist at the International Institute for Sustainable Development's Water Program, where she leads an initiative to scale up the adoption of natural infrastructure across the Canadian Prairies. Next to her is Todd Gartner. Todd is Director of Cities for Forests and the World Resource Institute's Natural Infrastructure Initiative, where he provides technical support to unlock finance for 90-plus cities from around the world to invest in forests. And next to him is Alejandro Calvach, who leads the Nature Conservancy's Resilient Watershed Strategy in Latin America, where he aims for strategic partnerships and tools to promote nature-based solutions at a regional scale, including financial sustainability, training, and capacity building. On this side, in our second group, we have Mike Nemeth, who is manager at Nutrien, leading all water and biodiversity initiatives in Nutrien, based in Canada. Greg Brill is lead of nature-based solutions and biodiversity initiatives at the Pacific Institute and technical lead of the CEO Water Mandate, where he deals with the private sector primarily. And finally, last but not least, is Helen Wanjohi, who's the climate and engagement lead for WRI's Africa's Cities program, where she co-manages the city climate resilience portfolio in Africa while serving as the focal point for partnerships, engagement, and fundraising for the entire Africa Cities program. Welcome, and thank you for being here. So as I said, we're doing something a little bit different here. This is called an adapted fishbowl session, which means that we're putting these experts into small groups and we're calling them fishbowls. And they have the privilege of speaking to each other on two topics that have been coming out again and again in our work and in our discussions on how to implement more nature-based solutions, how to scale these up across geographies, and what needs to be done next. These two topics are capacity and roles. Why these topics? So capacity. Despite a growing body of evidence that nature-based solutions can support water security implementation efforts, we are significantly challenged by capacity issues. At the local level, for local implementers, professional practitioners, government officials, and everyone else who is involved in these efforts. The second topic is roles. So in global efforts on scaling nature-based solutions, there is a growing recognition that no one sector can do this alone. We need everyone. We need governments with their enabling policies. We need private sector actors. We need community and watershed groups, NGOs, multilateral agencies, and researchers. And these roles are evolving. So we want our experts to have conversations amongst themselves on what's working and what's not. So they'll be pretending that they're sitting at a cafe, at a beer pub, at a venue of their choice, drinking a beverage of choice. Apologies, we only have water for you today. And having an intimate conversation, talking to each other about what's working, what's not, and having honest conversations. And the rest of us get to peer in from outside the fishbowl. The first group on capacity, sitting on the other side, will have about 10 minutes to have their conversation. Group 2 will be listening carefully and will have an opportunity after the first 10 minutes to weigh in with some things that spark for them. Any comments, any questions, any things that come to their mind on the topic of capacity. Then we'll flip. Group 2 will talk about roles, where they'll have an intimate conversation about the kinds of things they're seeing on roles associated with nature-based solutions, and we'll do the same thing in reverse. Group 1 can weigh in with their comments, things that are sparking for them, any specific comments they want to add, and questions that they want to add. All of this should take us about 45 minutes. We'll turn to audience Q&A, both online and on-site after this. And then to end the session, we'll have a bit of a crowdsourcing element. So some of you got the cards that we passed around. For those of you who didn't get the cards, we'll take a moment between the transition. I'll get the panelists to go and sit in the audience for the crowdsourcing portion, and we'll make sure to pass the cards around where you'll have an opportunity to write something that you can contribute to our efforts. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to start group 1 on capacity with a simple seeding question. What specific capacity challenges are you encountering in your efforts to implement and scale up nature-based solutions across the world? And what's working to address these capacity gaps? Thanks.
Thank you, Dimple. Our team at IISD is working on an initiative called Natural Infrastructure for Water Solutions to scale up natural infrastructure on the Canadian Prairies. And we work on the ground installing floating treatment wetlands, for example, or water retention sites in agricultural landscapes, as well as to try to enable the funding and policy environment across the prairies to support nature-based solutions and natural infrastructure. When it comes to capacity, I think it's helpful to think through 2 lenses, both the supply of projects and the demand for these projects. And when it comes to demand, first and foremost, the Canadian Prairies, there are a lot of smaller, rural, and underserved communities, a lot of agricultural communities. And through our early engagement with them, they said, please don't develop another guidebook, or please don't come and give us more advice on what to do. We're very familiar with our own challenges. We need your active support as a partner to think through these kind of infrastructure options and feasibility assessments. And so, frankly, we've taken that to heart, but we've had to rethink our model of how are we meeting these communities where they're at, how can we streamline our guidance and make sure we're tapping into those existing rural networks we might not have previously gone to. So it's been a shift in behavior, I think, for our own team, and when you're grappling with those capacity challenges, you have to be prepared to do that. On the supply side for projects, another key learning for us has been it's hard to get projects off the ground without clear professional guidance. So we've been working with our partners at the Natural Assets Initiative to build capacity with planners, with asset managers, with engineers, so that they're the ones who often communities go to for support, and we want to make sure that nature-based solutions are really in their toolbox.
Mm-hmm. That's great. I mean, a lot of what you said really resonates, and I think about some of the big capacity gaps on the projects that we're working on, whether we're talking about Johannesburg, South Africa, through our scaling urban nature-based solutions for climate adaptation work in the region, or our wildfire risk reduction work in Northern California. And it's how do you move from guidance to very granular, context-specific ability to make the business case. And I think we've increasingly gotten good at a community to understand what to do, whether it's prairie lands or ponderosa pine forests. But there's still a capacity gap in being able to make a clear economic business case, and being able to show decision makers and financiers, here's what a return on investment looks like relative to just simply defaulting to cement and concrete and traditional built infrastructure. If we're able to overcome, which is no small task, overcome that and put dollars and cents and cash flows around natural infrastructure, I think we can go a long way from moving to theory into practice.
I fully agree on that, Todd. Actually, this is a very interesting case in Mendoza in Argentina, where water comes from glaciers, and actually it's a very famous region because of wine production and agricultural activities. But the thing is that wetlands that are critical for water regulation, water purification, are severely threatened by tourism activities, cattle ranching activities. So you were right in terms of making people understand this in the sense of why is this important. And one of the best lessons learned for us was how can you balance the technical capacity of implementing MBAs with local knowledge? Basically, local communities willing to participate with a more robust knowledge about the whole process of water cycle during the 4 seasons in Mendoza. And that was hard to do. Basically, that balance asked us immediately to work with local social scientists way ahead of project implementation to make sure they really understand what is going to happen, why are they in the project, why it's important for them being in the project. But you were right, the monetization process was the first question. What is this, how much is this benefit of doing this? So we tried, and that was quite complicated, to create a business case for wine sector. How much money is wine sector willing to lose if water availability changes over the long term? Right. And that's a quick and impressive question for them. So it's a bit of mix between the social science and the technical knowledge to really understand what's happening on the ground.
That's right. I think one of the things for me is, we've gotten pretty good at understanding what to do, and we have a clear understanding of the trajectory of positive change by implementing nature-based solutions, but there's still a pretty big capacity gap in doing the monitoring and evaluation. Right. If you look at all the surveys of NBS projects, whether it's Latin America, Africa, North America, there's still a dearth of hard data on the effectiveness over the long term. And a lot of that's because the grant funding cycle is 3 years, 5 years. You're barely at the first stage of implementation. We need to really expand our monitoring out decades to enhance that business case that this truly does work, so utilities, beverage companies help with that investment.
And when you're working with nature, often you have to tend to those projects, right? And that brings in this maintenance function that also needs to be paid for, and often requires support for those on-the-ground implementing partners. And so I think that's a key capacity challenge, is not just on the technical or the economic side, but how are we mobilizing resources to ensure that we're supporting organizations and people who will stick around to see these projects over the medium to long term.
Absolutely. I would love to call that the classic management skills that are not that common, basically meaning to build relationship locally, but also actually strong planning performance to do with long-term, to do with monitoring, to do with seasonal changes, right? Most of the things are basically delayed because in winters you cannot do anything on the ground. But all of that is basically with local knowledge and local capacity to build relationships. And I think that's important for any project in terms of scaling up.
Yeah, and the social science piece is critical, and the community capacity building piece, and it connects a lot of the things that we're talking about, right? There's a lot of energy being put into satellite imagery and AI, and how can that help us with tracking change over time? But how do we also couple that with local knowledge? And those community members on the ground who need to live with the benefits or the failures of these projects, how do we do a better job of having them be the monitoring anchor over the long term? It's a job creation approach, right? And it's a cost-effective way to make sure the community's bought into these projects.
So you mentioned that and in monitoring, but another key activity we built together with local communities was native species nursery creation. And that was fantastic because basically that involved children from schools, local communities, single mothers, family members, and they feel like actively participated in the project to the extent of being today, getting business from that. So basically made them able to be part financially on the project, and that worked really well. And besides that, monitoring is going to be critical for that, and they're part of monitoring as well. So collecting data, sampling in the river, that's actually happening. So,
totally.
Yeah.
That's so cool. I would love to build a nursery. What does that mean then for the composition of your teams when you're looking at capacity building and who you bring in to support with that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Again, I go back to the project we're working on with IISD in Sub-Saharan Africa, and most of the resources are going to local organizations. And we're really trying to weight the distribution of that funding to women's-led cooperatives, whether that's for nursery development, on-the-ground implementation, the monitoring. But we're fortunate to have resources from the government of Canada to kick this off. But if it's going to have durable outcomes, you're going to have to engage traditionally, non-represented community groups. So it's a shift, right, from what we're very comfortable working with the TNCs and the IISDs of the world. How do we get much better at working with local communities, understanding their needs and how they can fit in right now, how we can work together to grow joint capacity and really have them take the wheel of the car in the long term.
Similar for us, we actually work with an Argentinian really famous research institute, which is CONICET. They have the technical expertise we need for the implementation. But then we have a local partner, basically a local organization dealing with community management and leading the process, socially speaking. And I think, though, that for us, it's a little bit difficult not to have in staff social scientists helping to coordinate main activities. We are really good in conservation. We are really good in hydrological modeling, for example, but we do have a very strong flag for local communities. So we are getting more staffing for that, but we need a little bit more, I think, thinking in regional level. So yeah.
Yeah, it's my observation too. Shout out to all the social scientists, right? But such essential work for building up those relationships long term and understanding how change really happens. That's more inclusive and longer term.
Yeah, and it's one of the shifts that patience has never been my greatest asset. My wife will attest to that. And sometimes community engagement means that things might go a little bit slower at the beginning, but it's better to do things right and then ensure that those outcomes will be long-lasting than to hit, grant benchmarks, but have those things fade in the not-too-distant future.
Absolutely, and one of the key lessons learned for that is basically to start this engaging process way ahead than any technical activity, so that this is like starting a conversation with local communities, and I think that's extremely helpful.
Yeah. A big piece of that is, not so long ago, we would raise funds and then go to the community and say, here's the money we have, here's the role for you, where now we've really tried to take a step back and co-develop these proposals with the communities.
Exactly.
And that is, again, the only way you're ultimately going to be successful in the long run.
How are we doing for time?
We're good.
Oh.
You have
Great.
a couple more minutes,
Oh.
and then we're going to ask Group 2 to weigh in.
Yeah. I wonder, in terms of capacity, I know the next fishbowl next door is going to be talking about roles, but how about engaging decision makers? I mean, how do we balance the need to bring communities more in at the forefront, but also make sure that we're answering the right questions that decision makers are focused on?
I can speak to actually experience in a previous role where I ran a watershed organization in central Alberta, working a lot with rural municipalities. And it's so essential if you're working with local governments to get in front of those decision makers and have a frank conversation and a plain language conversation about how what you're doing benefits their priorities or learn what their priorities are. And I think that that's sometimes a missing step, right? And so I'm always advocating with our team, how can we get in front of a local council or just have that conversation about what are their major infrastructure projects in the pipeline or where are their concerns, so we can learn from them while also tapping into their existing networks of counselors or decision makers. So.
Well, in the context of Mendoza, we are framed in the Mendoza waterfront that actually, in which actually participate Dirección General de Irrigación, which is the water management authority in Mendoza, of the province, then the Secretary of Environment, and then the water utility. the big players of water with a couple of corporations actually sitting there. That's a very good vehicle for improved governance in Mendoza. Basically, they talk together and they decide together about a strategic plan agreed between key stakeholders and outsiders, which is really good. But you are right. I mean, it's not just about dealing with local problems. What is the main vision, long-term vision of that in terms of water security and watershed management? So it's an engaging process. It takes time, but it's a water fund helps a lot for that.
Totally.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask Group 2, who's been listening carefully, to weigh in. Is there anything that specifically stood out for you? Did it spark something that you thought was missing in the conversation about capacity? These are your 5 minutes to react to anything that you heard in Fishbowl 1.
Okay. Very interesting listening outside the window to that particular fishbowl. And a couple of things stood out for me. And I think the first is the capacity to be able to blend science and the local knowledge and lived experiences, particularly for the most vulnerable. Because when we talk about NBS, and often it's a nexus of ecosystems that, for instance, in cities are highly fragile or degraded, interspersed by really vulnerable communities, then there's that need to localize, because there's no one size fits all, and context is really important in the case of that level of implementation. And what does that mean? That partnerships then are really important because the problem is multi-layered and so are the solutions. So I think that for me was really interesting. And the second thing was to get out of the labs and the boardrooms into not just the local communities, but into the corridors of power and decision-making so that we can catalyze action. Happy to hear what the rest of my fishbowlists think.
One thing that I heard was building the business case. And I know that quite often when we talk about building the business case, we're building that business case for potential funders, for internal selling of projects. But how are we building the business case? And I guess maybe, are we building the business case for decision makers? Because it's easy, and I also like how I heard, it's easy to work with the IISDs and the TNCs, but how do we, when we're engaging local NGOs and local groups, that's what we need to be doing, because that's who's going to be there at the end. But are we also connecting and building that business case so that the social, economic, and environmental outcomes that the governments or the decision makers want to see, are they being built so that they have continued engagement, desire to keep that work going? Sometimes I believe that that's maybe missing in nature-based solutions, sustainability.
I'm going to riff off what Mike said as well around building the business case, because so often you have corporates, and I'm going to put my corporate hat on and say, we have X $100,000 to invest in a nature-based solutions. But if you look at the design, implementation, and M&E phases, you need to foreground so much of the skills development and the training and operationalization of local communities and local organizations that it takes sometimes 70, 80, 90% of the budget away. And if you've got a 5-year timeline in a project and you are spending 80% of your budget developing the foundational elements, a lot of people tend to shy away from that. So how do we start bridging that divide between bankability and ready-to-go projects with building this really strong foundation and buy-in from local communities and local organizations that are going to be key for the long-term sustainability of projects?
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for your reactions. Okay, Fishbowl 2, you're on. Your topic is roles, and your first question that you can use to start off your conversation is, what are the most critical roles in your efforts to implement and scale up nature-based solutions? And what are some of the limitations of your own role in your efforts? You have 10 minutes.
Okay, I can start. I guess when we look at some of our nature-based solutions and what we're trying to do in agriculture, working with farmers on the ground, we have to be pragmatic in our solutions. So we need to make sure that we're bringing people together that can support pragmatic solutions over time. That really, that boils down to being a convener, right? Being able and willing to step out and lead. So taking a leadership role, being a convener, and bring the partners together But one of the things that we can't always do is make sure that all of the partners are there, because we only have one perspective. And so as we bring other partners in, particularly on the public sector side of things, sometimes we're missing different angles and different perspectives, and so we don't have all the answers. But I find that being a convener and a leader is sometimes easy, but we don't have it all, and so working with others to help us flesh out those parts that we don't always get right is one thing that we're maybe missing.
One of the key things that's coming out of being an earshot of the capacity group is seeing how connected capacity and roles are as well. And I think that's a key component both internally within the Pacific Institute and CEO Water Mandate, but also with our external partners as well. So where we are is in the thought leadership space. We develop critical guidance and very practical tools to help build the business case for nature-based solutions. And what I was hearing from capacity side is no more guidance, no more support. But yet, and I certainly agree with that, because there's a huge amount out there. But the problem is so many people are not necessarily understanding what's under the hood of nature-based solutions. And they're saying, oh, we'll just plant 1 million trees. And it's a great round number. But in reality, it's not going to address the challenges on the ground. So understanding what your internal capacity looks like, but also the roles that you have internally, really helps to understand what needs to happen externally as well. So, for example, let's take a big corporate partner. And so often within these collective action ambitions with nature-based solutions, they just see the corporates as the checkbook holders. They'll just come in and write the check for the whole thing. And in reality, that's not necessarily just their role. They want to be part of the design, the implementation, and the M&E focus. They want to be part of the broader systematic collective within that. So I think understanding that role and the role of the different players in the organization is going to be key to that. The other point I just want to touch on is around the multi-benefits and multi-skills that come with it. Within an organization, very few of us have the skill sets to be able to understand the full spectrum of a nature-based solution. So within a corporate sector, let's say you have a water team, but they may not necessarily understand the biodiversity components of that or the carbon components. So you're going to have to understand the full roles within your organization and also externally as well.
Perfect. And I think I'll pick up from where Greg left off. At WRI, we feel that there's the power of science. I know we've been told less research, more work, but I think it's really critical for us. One of the biggest roles we play is first understanding what that means in terms of NBS, particularly for an urban context, and really critically also the fact that to build that evidence base will then accelerate and increase adoption and investment in NBS. But I think more critically is beginning to understand the science of beyond the monetary, the non-monetary. How do we explain that? How do we explain the non-monetary benefits in a way that communicates? So that's one particular piece or role that we play. But I think really critically is the element on ground, in country, a negotiation role. Because if I pick an urban context, most of our cities are congested, densely populated, really built up, especially in the zones where, urban and nature converge. And so there's limited space, competition for that space. And so how do we negotiate with the local communities, negotiate with the authorities, one, to make the case, whether it'll be in a dollar sign as a case, and whether it'll be that non-monetary. So a negotiation role, I think, beyond the science, and that's where the social science comes in as well, is a really critical role.
Yeah, Helen, you made a good point that bringing in the social science, there's always more research that could be done, but applied research and making it locally relevant for nature-based solutions is really critical. And I know that in agriculture that it's very easy, for one part of the country or one part of a cropping system to say, oh, we'll do cover crops. Well, cover crops don't work everywhere all the time. And every field is different, and every cropping system is different, and every farmer is different. So really playing into that local, whether you call it research or efforts to be able to understand what works and how does it work, to be able to build local capacity, to be able to build local understanding, and that's how you start to get uptake of understanding what those are. And then to Greg's point, you made that point about funders or corporates coming in and just being seen as the funders. A lot of corporates have a lot of expertise, and for Nutrien particularly, we see sustainable ag as part of our business. Successful farming productive farms, profitable farms, that is our business. And so if our customers are successful, we will be successful. And so we want to make sure that we're not just seen as a funding agency, but we're actually there participating in nature-based solutions, because we feel there's a lot that agriculture on managed landscapes can do as part of, participating in nature-based solutions. And the social side of it, Helen, like you mentioned, getting more than the environmental side, getting the social side, getting the economic side, and then tying in those valuations. And I think that goes back to the other fishbowl and what they were talking about, building capacity and building the business case. If we can do that and show that to business leaders and to governments and decision makers, that nature-based solutions can have more of a platform to launch off on.
I'd like to build on that point, Mike, because right in the beginning, when you introduce yourself as a facilitator as well, how are you part of the conversations in Calgary or anywhere else that you're operating in? Because you're not just writing the checks at the end of the day, but you're part of the design of the process, you're part of the broader context of building out as part of your business model and things like that. So how do you fulfill that facilitatory role within the areas that you're investing in nature-based solutions?
Well, how do we facilitate? First of all, we show up and we just start having the discussions. We're willing to walk into a room, admit that we don't know everything, want to partner, have that desire to partner, and really we play multiple roles all within the same opportunity. Sometimes it's an enabler, being able to provide funding that enables something to happen somewhere. Sometimes it's taking more of a leadership role where you're sitting there and you're convening people, you're leading the charge, you're setting up the meetings, you're helping to outline the dream and the vision, and then as you do that, people start to come on board and see that with you. So it is kind of a facilitation role, but yeah, at the end of the day, it's more from the desire of doing what we want to do and it aligning with our vision and mission.
And I love it, and I think there's going to be, depending on the state or the stage of the project as well, your role may change over time.
Yeah.
So you may start as a convener, and then as an implementer, and then as a backseat driver or something like that. So I think it's going to be pretty dynamic over space and time.
Yeah, and we try to overlap it where our business is. I mean, our business is very different in Canada versus the United States versus Argentina versus Brazil versus Australia. And so it's how we choose to engage, what the local need is, who the other actors are, because agriculture, you're not doing it by yourself. We're just one part of the value chain. But we believe that if you're looking at nature-based solutions in agriculture, that there's huge opportunities, but each opportunity and the actors involved are going to be different everywhere you go.
Maybe the other thing I could add in terms of, roles and the things that are important, I think even as we think through what role we would play, I think always important to think through the unintended impacts of nature-based solutions and the things that we do, whether we direct finance there, the unintended harm that could come, to communities when we think that we are implementing something good. And I think that comes back again to the role of science interspersed with the local science and understanding the local context so that we can prevent maladaptation and doing the wrong thing, in what we think is the right way.
Yeah. Yeah, and that brings up, unintended consequences. There's often good things that you might do from a community aspect or an economic aspect where, we'll bring this business in. I heard in a session yesterday, and I do not know anything beyond just wet milling of coffee causes water quality problems. And so, that was a good economic boom for the community, but when it starts polluting their water source, it became an issue. Now there was nature-based solutions that they ended up implementing where nature was filtering the water and everything worked out. But there are those unintended consequences of sometimes bringing something in that seems really good, and we have to make sure that we remember that anytime we're working in nature, it's a natural system, which means it's variable, and we have to take into account those variances and unknowns.
Thanks, folks. Over to Fishbowl 1. Anything that came up for you while you heard the group on roles talking? Did you disagree? Was there something that really changed for you?
Maybe just one refinement I would make to this point I had made earlier around no more guidance is Obviously, there's a need for more scientific and technical knowledge and guidance. It's more so about what's the balance to that in terms of local rootedness and responding to their needs, and we want to make sure that we're doing both, right? And I think that both fish bowls have spoken to that need across the board. I had a question maybe for Greg. You mentioned this issue of corporations who want to invest money into good projects, and yet it's hard to get that pipeline of projects sometimes well established. What are you seeing internationally through your work in terms of what's working to connect the dots between this desire to invest and then the need to find good projects?
Go for it.
Great. So there's a spectrum, and the two poles are really interesting here. The one is there are organizations that, thank you, they want to be part of the program from the beginning. So they understand this is a long-term commitment, 20, 25 years, and they're in it for the long haul. So they will happily invest in skills development, training, operationalization, design principles, etc., with local communities in order to build out that long-term sustainability process and principles within the NBS. You have others on the opposite side of the spectrum that have significant budgets but want to land with shovel-ready projects on the ground. And their CFO, for example, will not do anything without a significant ROI baked in there. So you've got very polarized perspectives here, and then lots in the middle as well, where, and not all the investors will come in from the beginning. You also have 5 years down the line, somebody will want to be part of that and get appropriate attribution from the investments down the line. So depending where you are and the organization, the geography, the sector, you've got very variable inputs from a roles perspective from different funders.
Yeah, I think, building on that, we've talked about the business case and talked about local relevance and how those things connect with the different roles that need to be played. So why should the corporate make an investment? Does it help with their bottom business line of producing a beverage, siting a new data center, what have you? What does that long-term ROI look like for communities, and how do you make sure there's no unintended consequences? Bringing them in early, showing up is the first step, showing up with humility that we don't all know all of the answers. And then what is that long-term business case for government officials and decision makers? How does it impact the next election cycle? How does it fit in with long-term capital planning? If we're making decisions in isolation and not considering all of those different elements of the business case, it's unlikely we're going to be successful at scale.
I'm just trying to mix up the two fish bowls, and that's quite nice because yeah, exactly. Okay. So you heard like negotiation skills, but then convenient role and our capacities, right? So after all of that, I'm asking myself, to what extent are we aware that this is not anymore like a space in which one organization leads a project, instead of really aware of not collective action, right? This is absolutely critical today. We heard like a lot of these days, actually, and we are doing that for a long term and for a long way in the past, but we are not fully aware how important it is work with others, negotiate with others, agree with others to really get impact on a scale.
That resonates with me personally as we think about the climate crisis and the urgency of finding solutions. We can't let our egos get in the way, right? And so finding those partnerships with like-minded organizations and people and communities can be so essential. And sometimes it's being just recognizing your own skills and limitations and being humble, and then finding those connection points can drive progress faster.
Something that was said was you see projects across the board where maybe 70% of the resources are used for the stakeholder engagement, the scientific understanding, kind of getting to the place where you can have a shovel ready to go into the ground. And as a conservation community, we often do a poor job of full cost accounting.
Oh, yeah.
And so when we look for investment, we simply say, well, once the shovel hits the ground until the project's complete, here's what it's cost. We fail to build in those 3 to 7 years of engagement and capacity building. And if you're going to the private sector, they're very comfortable with full cost accounting, right? The prices of pharmaceuticals are so high because of the R&D side, yet in the conservation world, we feel uncomfortable thinking about all of the inputs that are needed to deliver the outcomes. And if we're able to kind of get over that hump, I think it'll go a long way to making sure we have the necessary resources to deliver at scale.
On that, Todd, as well, on the other side of things as well, when people fail to build an appropriate budget for the O&M cycles too.
Absolutely.
Because there's a huge component there, and we see this so often in the public sector, where you've got a 5-year term for an organization or whatever the case is, and then they're very seldom building that budget for beyond the implementation phase. And that's often where the failure in nature-based solutions comes, because a wetland it's not just a climate resilient thing. You still have to go in and remove alien vegetation or remove it after a fire, whatever the case is. So there are components of it that have to have that O&M function built in. And we often see failure because that's not considered.
And it'll be interesting, the space that you work with corporates on long-term water stewardship, public-facing commitments, right? As we think about 2030, even 2050, do they have the willingness to pay for that O&M to make sure that it's not just the next couple of years, but over the long term that the investments are leading to durable outcomes? Mm-hmm. It's going to be a sea change in the space, but I think it's necessary and likely to happen.
All right, maybe I'll take advantage of the natural pause to see if there are questions from the audience. Megan, do we have any questions online by any chance?
Great. Can I just repeat it right now?
Sure, and I'll read it out.
So one question from the chat is, how do we ensure communities' participation in monitoring post-project timelines?
How can we ensure communities' participation in monitoring post-project timeline? Anyone want to take a stab at that? Helen?
Yeah, let me have a go at that one. I think one of the critical things is if we involve communities from conception, so we are co-designing, co-creating, we visioned for this together, we implement it together, beyond the grant timelines that Todd referred to, and once you have gone, these communities own this project. And so even over and beyond what you had designed, if you have worked together with them to design the project and implement, and you have worked together with them to think through long-term governance mechanisms, acknowledging the local structures that exist, then that project will continue beyond the timeline. And also thinking through how, as we design the project, how do we ensure that livelihoods are coming out of it, so that there's also an additional reason to keep this going, because it's a source of livelihood for these communities.
Anyone else want to take a stab at that question?
I think it builds on what Todd and I were just talking about as well, is making sure that there's an appropriate budget for that specific phase within the project, is to make sure that we don't just invest in the fun bits of implementation, but over the full duration of the project, from pre-feasibility all the way through to O&M as well.
Yeah, and maybe just one last thing there is, many of the projects we all work on are started with philanthropic and grant funding. There's not enough philanthropic and grant funding to do the long-term O&M. So how do we make sure we're building these to be self-sufficient, to generate revenue, to create livelihoods, and to be transparent when there's challenges, so we don't set communities up for a place where things just stop once that final grant report comes in?
Thank you. Any other questions online, Megan?
Yes. Can everyone hear me? Okay.
Sure.
So one other question from the chat is, there's a gap between applied research and planning, the time that research takes to reach the planners. So in that case, which role and capacity techniques can be more useful in reducing that time period?
I think an extension to that part of the question as well is there's a big gap between the applied research and practice and policy as well. And the policy instruments are key for incentivizing further investments in nature-based solutions. If we look at parts of Africa, there's still a number of policies that say that the grey infrastructure option is the only option you can take here, and green is not even considered. And so that small shift would unlock catalytic funding globally to be able to just kind of unlock the investment in nature-based solutions at scale.
Anyone else on that question? Time lags? On site, questions? Do we have microphones? You can take around. We'll make sure we get to you at the back. I see the hand. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. My name is David Smith from WMB. My question actually starts with a little story. Don't worry, it's very short. I was walking in my local town, and there was some trees planted some years ago by the town council, and there was now a sticker stuck to one of the trees, and it said, "Your climate refuge. Use this area to escape the heat from the summer." And I took a photo of that and sent it to my colleagues at work, and I said, "Geez, look at this. Nature-based solutions in action." And my colleague at work wrote back to me, and she said, "That's not nature-based solutions." And we had a massive debate over what the definition of nature-based solutions is. And this is actually true for the project that we're in together with you, Dimple, actually. The project's called Natalie, and it's a massive EU project on nature-based solutions, and that same debate was translated into the project. And we spent a long time seeing exactly what is the definition of nature-based solutions. And I was thinking about this as to why would that be important? It's important for the framework in which we operate. It's important for monitorizing. It's important for the policies that we can unlock. And it's also important for all of the funding that can go down into these areas. So I was wondering, to the aquarium, as you so rightly put it, that what is, in your view, the definition of a nature-based solution? And in that view, do you think it is something really important that we define it very correctly? Or do you think we can just loosely define it, and with that, we can operate within that type of framework? Thank you.
Juicy question. Who wants to take that? Oh, I see multiple people reaching for
I
microphones.
can
Go for it.
So I think so in agriculture, farmers didn't really love the term sustainable agriculture until regenerative agriculture came along. Then they didn't mind sustainable agriculture because they hated the term regenerative agriculture. So I think defining something is really critical. And so, when I hear that story, I think, well, yeah, trees and shading, we depend on shading as a nature-based, dependency in our, communities, and we don't think about that. But having gone through a nature assessment for our company, you realize how much you actually depend on nature, where you depend on nature, and why you depend on nature. So from an agricultural perspective, I think it's really important to define nature-based solutions, because a lot of the things that we could or do in agriculture, people wouldn't consider nature-based solutions. But when you think about doing anything in a natural system that produces a greenhouse gas or a carbon benefit, a water benefit, or a biodiversity benefit, to me, that's a nature-based solution. So if you're doing that and you're creating a positive effect and having a positive outcome, that's a nature-based solution. So that may be something that's enriching your soil health, building resilience in your farm, reducing the potential of nutrient loss or runoff, creating habitat within the existing places or maybe the marginal areas of your farm. All of those things are little things that maybe as a farmer or a value chain, people don't recognize, but if we start talking about it, we could actually build capacity and enable people to do more of it because they realize that they're part of something, that it can tie to regenerative ag programs. So if a company has a regenerative ag sourcing requirement, well, if you're doing nature-based solutions, you're doing something good for the planet, you're doing something good for your sourcing capabilities, it's a win-win. So I think it's critically important, and maybe it's different by sector, maybe it's different by region, but within whatever context you're working in, I think the definition is critical, but that's how I look at it.
Yeah, let me also jump in there. And I think why the definition is important is while we view it as, and a lot of people might view it, as you said, as maybe like tree planting, for instance. I think the element of the process of NBS being that environmental restoration while promoting sustainable development is really critical, because then it means that we are not just restoring to restore. We are thinking about that matrix of ensuring that it results in environmental, social, and economic benefits. So for instance, if you want to regenerate, let's say, a river, right? And you say, let's demolish all the informal settlements that lie along it, like we saw in Nairobi recently, and displace thousands of people, destroy livelihoods. Is that true NBS? And I think that's where that definition becomes really important, to say it is to do these things, but to ensure that we promote sustainable development. Thanks.
like both of your comments, and maybe expanding the terminology a bit. In your program, Natural Infrastructure, my program also, Natural Infrastructure, and really thinking about nature as a form of infrastructure, but not in a silo. The massive floods in Nairobi, agriculture in Canada, you're not going to deal with the systemic challenges of the environment we have simply with nature. We need to think about the complement and a hybridized approach of green and gray. So better irrigation systems along with sustainable agricultural practices that reduce nutrient use. Better sewage systems in Nairobi along with enhanced riparian areas to maximize groundwater infiltration and the like. I like to think about nature as part of our infrastructure solution set. Sometimes in some sectors, the whole idea of nature is, oh, it's a left-leaning, liberal, whatever, right? And if you can really think about it in terms of how it complements our traditional built infrastructure, especially on the financing front, it'll make it much easier to bring large-scale funding to the table.
My only addition, 'cause excellent points all around, is I think you had also brought up what types of nature-based solutions or natural infrastructure might be considered. And so it's important to consider the definition and the multiple benefits that projects may yield. But it's also really helpful to say, here's what we mean in practice: water retention sites, riparian areas, forests, and here's how these are contextually relevant to your needs and what the benefits are in your local area or region. And so if you just leave it at the definitional conversation, it will seem very abstract to people.
Thank you. I know we had a question back there. We'll go there first, and then you had your hand up as well. Thank you.
Hi, okay.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Sandy Ruxtall with the International Water Management Institute. My question is about a lot of the work that I find myself doing at the moment is in conflict-affected and fragile situations, particularly in the Middle East. And these, of course, are two things we haven't really drilled down into here. I'm going to challenge you. I'd love to hear your reflections on building these investable, bankable models for NBS in these types of situations. We're working, for example, in the Palestinian territories, in Lebanon, in refugee camps in Jordan, and also in the Palestinian territories, to apply these types of solutions to improve disaster resilience, climate resilience, also to promote livelihoods. These are quite micro sort of landscapes to be working in, but the humanitarian community isn't always used to taking a physical landscape approach to these types of things. So there are all sorts of challenges in doing the research to prove that these are really investable solutions for these scenarios, but personally it's something I believe a lot in. So I'm wondering if you have any reflections in the work that you're thinking about, and again, bringing us back to this point of we need to show the value of this so we can promote investment in this space. Do you have any advice with regard to how to do that in the types of scenarios that I just mentioned? Thank you.
I will jump in with one point, and it was discussed by the capacity team a little earlier today. One of the biggest issues that we often have is the sort of helicopter approach, where we arrive in these situations, and you gave some really great examples of Lebanon or Palestine, for example, and we just assume that a treatment wetland is the best option there because it is what we believe to be the best option, whereas the local challenges may be something completely different. So utilizing the local knowledge and saying what is the issue that you would need your nature-based solutions to address, and then it might be a combination of a treatment wetland plus a riparian buffer plus. And so just making sure that local buy-in and local understanding, local knowledge set is applied is going to be a critical starting point for this. And then you automatically get the local buy-in from the community, so that sustainability is almost baked in from the beginning. And this is a really key part for investment as well, because then you know that your investments are going to be bankable over the long term because you're meeting the local needs, the local challenges through this multi or stacked benefit approach.
Any other responses? Thanks, Greg. Sure.
Hi, hello. Is this?
You're good.
Thank you. My name is Lynn Porta. I'm with the North American Youth Parliament for Water and Concurrent Technologies Corporation. So I think the question prior to me, and my question might actually be on a similar theme around, for all of you, asking your best practices around trust building in low trust situations. So I think earlier the fish bowls touched on the nature conservancy type groups, the IISDs and so on. You're used to working with each other because you're kind of similar organizations, and there's this interest in building the relationship with local communities, but sometimes either within local communities that need to be brought together, there may be low trust between groups, or the convening partner, the sort of the big helicopter reputational partner, may be seen as a partner not yet trustworthy by the group. So how are you initiating, or what are the best practices in initiating these kind of trust building trust in the relationship among the partners to convene and implement these projects, since they are so long-term and can be very sensitive?
A lot of it is just time. At least all the relationships that I deal with in multi-stakeholder or collaborative or collective action projects, it's time. It's time on the ground. If you're working with farmers, you go, you spend time on their farm, you listen to them, you go to the communities that they live in, you speak with, the municipal districts and counties and local governments. You just spend time there because business is done at the speed of trust. And so this goes back to capacity and also roles. You may spend 2 or 3 years getting established and getting a reputation of, I care, I want to see this succeed, and I'm here for your success as well as mine, before you even get a project going. And so it really is just taking the time to be there and to be present and to listen. And so I know that probably spans all different sectors and all different situations, but that's been my experience.
Just to add on.
Okay. From our perspective, we believe that this is where partnerships plays a role, because we believe that the trust building process, like you said, it takes a really long time that sometimes you don't have when you have unlocked some funding to do something. And so for our work at WRI, we work with local grassroots groups that they themselves have invested time and energy, perhaps 20 years more, with these local communities. And working through them, we then get together the trust of the community. And I think it enables us to move the engagement process faster. And so what we are doing, for instance, in the program that Todd talked about, SUNCASA, in 3 African cities, we are working with the local grassroots groups there. So whether it's in Rwanda with the Association of Genocide Widows, that has a lot of trust there. In South Africa, the Alexandra Water Warriors, and other associations. In Kenya, we work with Slum Dwellers International Kenya. So just working with organizations that have built really deep partnerships with these local communities then enables us, to work together and get that trust from these communities faster. Thanks.
No, you just adding to that clear, consistent communication is critical here. It's not that classic, but what happens is that nothing can be not consulted with local communities, and the communication process all the time is very important. Then there is this idea of share ownership of this project. This is not anymore our project. This is our project in the big sense of including local communities in any decision-making body of the project from a very early stage. I think that helps a lot as well.
I'll jump in very quickly.
Sure. Last comment.
Over the last 4 years, within Pacific Institute's work on nature-based solutions, we've gone through 300, 400, 500 corporate-sponsored case studies. And in almost all of them, there's a very limited amount of stakeholder engagement, either at the beginning or at the end. And so, and you often see it at either one side, but not throughout the whole process. So what we've done is we've developed a stakeholder engagement guide, and it gives 10 best practices on how to engage more effectively. And we've seen a number of organizations pick this up, global organizations and very high-profile ones as well. what we're now seeing is a complete shift, and I love your sea level change or your sea change example here, where more and more examples, and Mike's mentioned it too, starting at the beginning, building out that local trust, and then going through the entire process. So there seems to be a fundamental shift happening, which is really exciting. And it does move at the speed of trust. So take the time to build the trust, understand what the local needs are of the communities, and then base it around there. Because historically, it was always the entry point of the corporate. We have water challenges. We're going to invest in a water-related project. But now they're seeing a far broader community-based, multi-benefit approach is a far more sustainable one to get a significant ROI baked into that project as well.
Thank you so much. I am going to cut short the audience question and answers, but I know that most of our experts are going to be around here after the session, so please feel free to reach out to them. Okay, for the last 20 minutes or so, we are going to do something a bit different. I'll ask the experts to maybe take spots in the audience, and we're going to use your brain power to crowdsource some good ideas. So as you can see, many of us are in this space doing the work either with communities or with governments and others. We want bold ideas from you. So if I can get the slide up, the last slide with a poll, we're going to ask you a question, and all of you, I hope, have a card in your hand. If you didn't get a pen, just use one of your own. We want a bold idea from you. We want to know, if you were 10 times bolder, if there was no limitation of money or other practical considerations, what would you like to do to implement more nature-based solutions across the world? Tell us what your boldest idea is, and we'll do a bit of voting on this. So you have about 5 minutes to write your bold idea in the card that you have in your hand. When I give you a cue, I'm going to ask you to pass your card around to the left. I'm just going to pick a side. If there's no one to your left, maybe get up and find someone that you can pass it to. And we're going to do 5 rounds of voting. So at one point, I'll say stop. You take the card, whatever card you have in your hand. It'll be someone else's card at this point. Read it and put a number on it. Vote on it from 1 to 5. 1, not your cup of tea. 5, you want to get on it right away. It's inspiring, it's amazing, this is a great idea. We'll do this round of voting 5 times. It's going to be a bit of trial and miss. I did not realize we're going to sit in a theater-style seating, so a little bit of movement is okay. Feel free to get up, find a way to pass it to another person, and we're going to do some crowdsourcing. At the end, we hope to find at least 3 to 5 really bold ideas that we can incorporate into our work, leave you a bit inspired with on a Monday morning, and take it to our social media and other places. So put on your thinking hats. If you don't have a card, we might have a few left, and if we run out of cards, then maybe share with someone. That's another way of interacting with someone in the room. If you have questions on the process, let me know. I forgot to mention, for the online audiences, of course, we can't do the voting, so we've just asked them to give us their bold ideas online. So you're probably already seeing some of the online responses coming on. You can use some of those. You can come up with your own ideas. We'll get the online participants to vote up or thumbs up each other's ideas if possible. But in the room, we're hoping to generate some energy and some bold ideas that come from the group here. Couple more minutes, and then I'm going to get you to pass your cards with the bold ideas. So I hope that you're all starting to write at this point. Maybe we'll start the voting now, see how this works out. So if you have a card in your hand that has a bold idea on it, I'm going to say start and just start passing. So at this point, get a card from someone next to you, just pass it to the next person, just keep passing. At some point I'll say stop, and that's when you get whatever is left in your hand. So start. No, just pass it. Take it as an opportunity to get up. It's a Monday morning. You'll have lots of sitting to do today and for the next week. Do you want me to pass it? No? Okay, stop. Whatever card you have in your hand at this point, take a minute to read it, and you're voting on it at the back of the card, and you're using the numbers 1 to 5. 1, not your cup of tea. It's okay, not for you. It doesn't work in the context that you live in, work in. 5 is, it's amazing. This is exactly what should happen. And all the numbers in between. So 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Take a minute to vote on your card at the back before I say start again. And then we'll do this again a few times. Yeah, so. And feel free to chat with your neighbors. If you've got someone next to you, pair up, talk about the bold ideas, have a chuckle, or go, what is this? It's like bold. It needs to be bolder. If you've had a moment to vote, maybe I'll give everyone about half a minute. Finish voting. I see a few conversations going on. So I'll give a few seconds and then we'll start again. Okay, start passing. Start passing the cards around. Don't worry about which direction. You may end up with your own card, but that's okay. Then you have an opportunity to vote on it. Use the intermediaries in the room to pass your cards along. Stop. Stop and vote. This is the second round of voting. Look at the cards in your hands. Oh, you've done, okay. We'll stop it soon then. Look at a card in your hand and give it a vote. How's it going?
I asked Josie and she said that she can send the results afterwards.
Okay.
And we can get everyone involved.
We'll do this one last time. If you have a card that's been sitting in your hand, pass it around and vote one last time. All right, folks, we're going to call it. Thank you for passing all the cards around and voting. So now, this is the final stage. Whatever card you have in your hand, if you can turn it over and check the scores on it. So I've been told that it didn't work as perfectly as we thought. So anyone have a card that has a lot of 5s on it? Anyone has like almost all 5s? Can you read it out? Give power to local communities to lead NBS as creation projects. Process. As creation process. Thank you. Anyone have a card that has a lot of 5s on it?
Yeah. Use challenge funds to engage local communities in identifying, designing, and implementing NBS projects.
Use challenge funds. I love it. Any other really bold ideas out there? Anyone have a lot of 5s or mostly 5s with a couple of 4s? Intermediaries to facilitate blended finance for nature-based solutions from governments, NGOs, and businesses to enable real scale. Thank you. One last one. Any really bold idea? Anyone has a card that has a lot of 5s, maybe mostly 4s? Do you have one? Oh. Create an incubator for NBS and select the most promising projects to be funded. I like that. Thank you. Any, well, we had some trouble online, so we did have 63 responses, but but we weren't able to find a way to vote on them or get kind of any version of this kind of quantitative validation, I guess, but we do have some great ideas online as well. We will send out some of these bold ideas to you. I know we have the capacity to reach you. Anyone who attended this session, we have your information. Oh, not sure. Not sure. Apparently, we're not sure, but we will try and put up some of the boldest ideas somehow and make sure we share them with you. Just for the final piece, I will ask Greg to do a few reflections from this session. So as you saw, we tried something a bit different. We tried to build on the kind of momentum that comes from conversations we've been having in this space for a really long time. Yeah. Sure.
Firstly, thank you everybody for joining a really fun session. I really enjoyed that. I have 5 key thematic areas that I want to touch on. I'm going to be pretty brief because I know we've only got about 5-10 minutes left. So the first for me is I love what Todd was saying, is that the roles and responsibilities or role and capacity component is more of an aquarium than a fishbowl. And I think the interconnectedness of the topics that we discussed today are critical. Making sure that there's no more siloed approaches to anything with nature-based solutions is going to be key. A couple of points under thematic area 1, and the first was around working with multiple stakeholders is going to be key. Meeting communities where they're at, identifying what their key needs are, what the challenges are across social, economic, and environmental components as well. Setting expectations up front to make sure that people that are working with nature-based solutions or the beneficiaries of nature-based solutions understand that these are often long-term interventions and actions that require a lot of budget, a lot of time, a lot of input, and that sustainability principle is really going to be key to build out that long-term expectation up front. The use of local knowledge is going to be key as well, and trying to compensate or complement with technology is also going to be a very useful tool to build out the skills, the training, the necessary application of nature-based solutions at scale, depending on the sector, the geography, and the needs of communities on the ground. It takes time to work with communities. We've mentioned a number of times that things move at the speed of trust. But often, nature-based solutions work better with local community buy-in from the beginning, and that you need to build in time for local engagement as much as possible. The last point under this kind of engagement umbrella is co-development is often a key way to build that long-term sustainability of a nature-based solution. Under number 2 is how do we build the business case? This was mentioned multiple times, and specifically not just the economic case as well. Social science raised a flag a couple of times that social valuation is key here, as well as the environmental or the sort of non-vocal voice in the room. How do we build out those environmental components down the line? Under number 3, funders can be part of the discussion as well. So they're not just the check writers, but they need to be part of the design, the pre-feasibility, the implementation, and the monitoring and evaluation as well. Get them included as much as possible. There are multiple hats and roles that can be worn by different partners, different players along the different project phases, and make sure that those hats are changing as the needs are being facilitated on the ground. This is also going to be based on time, geography, and the project itself. Showing up is the first step. Mike said that, and I think that's a key thing to do. Make sure that you're there to listen if you are part of the funding or are part of the project team. Don't just assume that you know the answer, because local knowledge often can unlock something quite catalytic or strategic on the ground. My last 2 points, the one is budgets are needed across the board for pre-feasibility and design all the way through to implementation and monitoring and evaluation as well. And this is often not the case. So we often foreground the budget into pre-feasibility and design, sometimes or always implementation, but very seldom into monitoring and evaluation. And knowing that the budget needs a lifetime of 5, 10, 20 years is an important component when funding these projects. And the last one, Todd said something really key, is that NBS is part of a toolkit. It's not going to be your silver bullet. It's not going to be able to answer everything, but it's part of a solution set that will be needed in order to address our societal and environmental challenges going forward. So thank you again for joining the session, and thank you, Dimple, for organizing. Really, really lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. Final thank you. I did want to thank all of our experts, Greg, Todd, Helen, Jose, Mike. Who did I miss? Alejandro, sorry. Thank you for the audience for coming and trying something different with us. We hope you enjoyed some aspects of it. Thank you to those people behind the scenes who've been helping. Megan, thank you for stepping up and doing online coordination. Ludwig and Mike on the technical side. Lena and others from CIWI who've been around and helping out wherever they can. And thank you to our funders. The BHP Foundation provided IISD the funds to join here to convene this session, and there are many other funders who are responsible for the great work that we and partners have been doing, the Government of Canada and others. And thank you to our audience. Thank you for making the time, sticking with us, and enjoy World Water Week. Thank you so much.